Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and often frustrating truth. Your brain might be the very reason you struggle to lose weight. But the good news, according to Dr. Andrew Huberman, you can actually rewire your brain to work for you, not against you. So let's explore why your brain keeps you fat and how neuroscience-backed strategies can help you finally break the cycle. All right, let's start by getting one thing crystal clear. The reason most people struggle with weight isn't that they're lazy, weak-willed, or simply not trying hard enough. It's far deeper than that. It's rooted in how your brain evolved over thousands of years, long before there were supermarkets, drive-thrus, and streaming services keeping us on the couch. If you've ever found yourself reaching for that extra cookie or demolishing a bag of chips while barely tasting the first handful, or ordering pizza late at night even though you're not truly hungry, I want you to understand your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's not betraying you, it's protecting you. Following a set of hardwired instructions that once ensured your ancestors' survival, for most of human history, food was scarce. Imagine waking up in a world where you had no fridge, no pantry, no guarantee you'd find enough to eat by sundown. Your very survival depended on spotting and consuming high-calorie foods whenever you could. In that environment, having a brain that was hyper-attuned to the sights, smells, and tastes of calorie-dense foods, particularly those rich in sugars and fats, was a massive evolutionary advantage. The person who could walk by a fig tree bursting with ripe fruit and not feel an overwhelming urge to gorge would have been at a serious disadvantage. Over time, those who didn't have strong cravings simply didn't pass on as many genes. That's why today, even in a world of caloric abundance, your brain still lights up like a pinball machine when you see a frosted donut or hear the crinkle of a potato chip bag. Your ancient wiring can't tell the difference between the feast or famine environment it evolved in and the all-you-can-eat buffet you live in now. There's also something fascinating that goes on in your neural circuits when it comes to food, and this is where the discussion moves beyond simple willpower. When you consume high-calorie, especially high-sugar or high-fat foods, your brain releases a powerful neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine's often misunderstood. It's not just about pleasure. It's about motivation, drive, seeking. It's what makes you crave, pursue, and repeat behaviors that your brain tags as important for survival. Back in hunter-gatherer days, dopamine surges after finding a honeycomb or stumbling upon a grove full of sweet berries ensured that you would remember exactly where to find them again. That was critical for staying alive. But now, dopamine is the same system that makes you drive out at 10 p.m. to get ice cream or keep snacking long after you're full. It's not because you're weak, it's because your brain is running a survival playbook that was written long before modern life existed. Now, let's dig a bit deeper into why these cravings are so persistent and why it feels like the more you give in, the harder it becomes to stop. Every time you indulge in a hyper-palatable food, meaning foods that are engineered to be incredibly rewarding, like cookies, chips, fast food, you're reinforcing specific neural pathways. Think of it like walking through tall grass. The first time, it's hard to get through, but walk the same path over and over, and you wear down a trail. Your brain is no different. Each repetition, each time you answer a craving, deepens that groove. Neurons that fire together wire together. Over time, simply seeing a commercial for your favorite burger can trigger a full physiological response. Your mouth waters, your stomach contracts, your mind starts planning how to get it. And here's something many people don't realize. These reward pathways are often stronger than the ones associated with basic hunger, meaning you could be well-fed, physically satisfied, and your brain will still drive you to eat purely for that dopamine hit. That's why so many find themselves eating out of boredom, stress, or habit rather than genuine nutritional need. It's because your brain's reward system can override your metabolic signals. On top of that, there's the issue of how modern foods manipulate these systems. Food companies spend millions engineering products to be bliss point perfect, a precise combination of sugar, fat, and salt that maximally stimulates your taste buds and floods your brain with dopamine. These combinations didn't exist in nature. You'd never stumble upon something in the wild that mirrors the taste and mouthfeel of a chocolate-covered caramel donut. As a result, your brain doesn't have a built-in defense. It simply registers, this is incredibly rewarding, let's get more. So if you've struggled with overeating or weight gain, it's not a personal failure. It's the predictable outcome of your brain's evolutionary programming colliding with a modern food environment specifically designed to hijack it. The deck is stacked. The system isn't broken. It's actually working exactly as it was meant to. It's just that now, in a world where high-calorie foods are cheap, plentiful, and aggressively marketed, that system can work against your health goals. Another aspect we need to consider is the concept of energy efficiency. Your brain is obsessed with conserving energy wherever possible. Moving your body, especially in sustained, rigorous ways, costs energy. Hunting and foraging once required immense effort. Rest was a precious commodity. In today's world, your brain still sees movement as a cost to minimize and rest as a prize to maximize. That's why the idea of binge watching a show on your couch can seem far more appealing to your brain than going for a run. Less energy out, more energy saved. Again, this was once adaptive. Now it often leads to storing energy as body fat because the intake side has skyrocketed while the expenditure side has plummeted. And it's not just about individual brain structures firing in isolation. It's a beautifully coordinated, albeit somewhat outdated, system. Your hypothalamus helps regulate hunger and fullness. Your limbic system, including your amygdala, tags emotional significance to food, like comfort eating when stressed. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational decision-making, tries to impose control. We shouldn't eat this entire cake, but under chronic stress, sleep deprivation, or even just repeated exposure to temptation, the emotional and reward circuits often overpower the logical ones. That's why late at night after a long day, your best intentions can unravel. Your prefrontal cortex is fatigued. Your limbic system says, "Pake now," and your brain's deep wiring rewards you for obeying. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we stop blaming ourselves. We stop labeling ourselves as failures when we slip up or struggle, because this is not just about self-control. This is about biology. Understanding the true source of the struggle is step one in taking back agency. When you realize your brain is following a script written to keep your ancestors alive, it becomes less about shame and more about strategy. And there are ways to start rewriting the script. By slowly introducing new routines and healthier rewards, you can begin to reshape those neural pathways. It doesn't happen overnight because these pathways took years, sometimes decades, to form. But your brain is plastic, meaning it's capable of change. Every time you resist an unhealthy craving, you slightly weaken that old trail through the grass. Every time you substitute a walk, a creative hobby, or even just a glass of water for that dopamine-seeking snack, you begin to carve out a new path. Over time, these small, repeated choices compound. Your cravings start to change. Foods that once seemed irresistible begin to lose their grip. Your brain learns that it can get dopamine from other healthier sources. It's a slow process, but a powerful one. You're literally remodeling your neural architecture, teaching your brain a new way to prioritize and reward behaviors. So the takeaway here is profound. Your brain is not sabotaging you out of malice. It's following ancient instructions, finely tuned by millennia of natural selection to help you survive in a harsh, uncertain world. But you don't live in that world anymore. You live in a world where survival isn't about finding the next meal. It's about choosing wisely from an overabundance of options. And the amazing thing is, by understanding how these systems work, you can start to steer them. You can begin to set up your life, your habits, and your environment in ways that support your goals instead of constantly clashing with them. You can work with your biology instead of against it. That's how you make real lasting change. Because at the end of the day, your brain is extraordinarily powerful. When you learn to understand its drives and gently redirect them, you unlock the ability to not just lose weight, but to fundamentally transform how you relate to food, to stress, to pleasure itself. And that's not just about looking better, that's about reclaiming your health, your energy, and your life. Let's shift our focus for a moment to something that often flies under the radar when people think about weight gain and why it can be so tough to shed extra body fat. I'm talking about the way stress and sleep, two pillars of daily life that seem almost separate from eating, actually have a profound, direct impact on your brain's regulation of hunger, fullness, and ultimately your body composition. Most people think if I want to lose weight, I just have to eat less and move more. But in reality, your brain is orchestrating countless signals behind the scenes that either support that effort or sabotage it. And two of the most powerful levers are how you handle stress and how well you sleep. Let's start with stress. Whenever you feel threatened, whether that's real danger like a car swerving into your lane or modern psychological threats like a looming work deadline, your body mounts what's called a stress response. It releases a cascade of hormones, the most prominent of which is cortisol. Now, cortisol is not inherently bad. In fact, it's essential. It mobilizes glucose, sharpens your focus, and primes your body to react quickly. If you were living on the savannah and a predator appeared, cortisol was one of the hormones that helped you survive. The problem is, unlike our ancestors who faced short bursts of danger, we live in a world of chronic stress. Emails, bills, relationships, social comparison. Our stress response gets triggered dozens of times a day, and cortisol stays elevated far longer than it was ever meant to. And here's where this connects to your brain keeping you fat. Chronically high cortisol doesn't just make you feel anxious or burnt out. It directly influences your appetite regulation centers in the brain, pushing you to seek out high calorie, high sugar foods. Cortisol increases the motivation to eat, and it tends to drive cravings specifically for calorie-dense comfort foods. Your brain interprets stress as a sign that energy expenditure might be needed, like running from danger, so it proactively encourages you to take in more energy. Evolution didn't optimize your wiring for taxes and inbox overload. It sees stress and thinks, store energy, prepare for hardship. And there's more. Chronic stress also changes the sensitivity of your brain's reward system. It can dampen the responsiveness of your dopamine circuits, meaning you need more stimulation to get the same level of satisfaction. That's why under stress, people often eat more junk food or scroll social media longer or binge watch shows deep into the night. You're chasing that dopamine to counterbalance the discomfort stress causes in the brain. Simultaneously, stress impacts your prefrontal cortex, the rational planning part of your brain that exerts top-down control over impulses. When cortisol is high, this area becomes less effective. That means your capacity to say no to that extra slice of cake or to avoid mindlessly eating while standing at the fridge is biologically reduced. It's not that you suddenly lack willpower. It's that stress hormones shift the balance of power in your brain, temporarily favoring the more primitive drive circuits over thoughtful restraint. There's another piece of this puzzle that can't be overlooked. Stress also indirectly affects your gut microbiome and inflammation levels. Chronic stress has been shown to alter the composition of the bacteria in your gut, which can in turn influence everything from how efficiently you extract calories from food to how strong your hunger signals are. Stress-induced changes in gut health may increase systemic inflammation, which loops back and influences insulin sensitivity and fat storage. So it's not just a mental thing. Stress literally changes your physiology in ways that encourage fat accumulation. Now let's talk about sleep. If I could convince more people of just one lifestyle factor that dramatically influences their weight, it would be the importance of getting consistent, high-quality sleep. Sleep is like a reset button for your brain's metabolic and appetite regulating systems. When you shortchange yourself on sleep, let's say getting 5 or 6 hours instead of 7 to 9, some very predictable, measurable changes occur in your brain and hormones the very next day. One of the most fascinating findings in neuroscience is how sleep deprivation affects two critical hormones, ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is your hunger signal. It rises when your stomach is empty and tells your brain, hey, we need food. Leptin, on the other hand, is produced by fat cells and signals satiety. It says we have enough energy on board, we can stop eating. When you're sleep deprived, ghrelin levels go up and leptin levels go down, meaning your brain gets a double message. We're hungrier than usual and we're less satisfied than usual. That's why after a poor night's sleep, you might find yourself reaching for pastries or craving high-carb foods that give a quick dopamine spike. Your brain is literally being signaled to eat more and feel less full. But it's not just these hormones. Functional MRI studies have shown that sleep deprivation leads to increased activity in the brain's reward centers when people are shown pictures of food. In parallel, there's reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex. In simple terms, when you're tired, your brain not only finds junk food more tempting, but your rational decision-making ability is also dialed down. You're more likely to give in to cravings. It's not a moral failing, it's a neurobiological guarantee. Your brain is trying to compensate for the lack of restorative energy from sleep by pushing you toward fast energy from food. Unfortunately, that usually means processed carbohydrates and fats that provide a quick dopamine and glucose rush. And there's yet another layer. Poor sleep disrupts insulin sensitivity. Even after just one night of sleep deprivation, your cells become more resistant to insulin, which means glucose stays in your bloodstream longer, promoting fat storage. Chronic poor sleep compounds this effect, setting up a vicious cycle of insulin resistance, higher circulating insulin, and easier fat accumulation, particularly around the abdomen. Let's bring this back to stress for a moment, because stress and sleep problems almost always go hand in hand. When you're stressed, it's harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. Your brain stays in a heightened state of arousal, replaying worries and scanning for threats. Then the next day, your lack of sleep increases cortisol, which amplifies stress further. Now you've got a self-perpetuating feedback loop. Stress disrupts sleep, poor sleep increases stress, and together they hijack your appetite and metabolism. So what does all this mean for people trying to lose weight or maintain a healthy body composition? It means you absolutely cannot overlook stress management and sleep hygiene. You can't out-diet or out-exercise chronic stress and chronic sleep deprivation. These forces are upstream drivers, meaning they set the conditions under which your brain will either support or sabotage your goals. When your stress levels are moderated and you're getting sufficient sleep, your prefrontal cortex is better able to regulate impulses. Your reward systems are more balanced, so you're less driven to compulsively seek out food for quick pleasure. Your leptin and ghrelin are properly aligned, giving you accurate hunger and fullness signals. Your insulin sensitivity remains intact, so your body efficiently uses glucose instead of shuttling it into fat storage. And the one thing that separates today from yesterday and tomorrow is that the average adult has a food system in their body. It's not magic. It's not simply a matter of willpower. It's basic brain, body, biochemistry operating under the conditions you give it. When you prioritize stress reduction and quality sleep, you create a neural environment that makes it exponentially easier to make good decisions around food and exercise. I want to emphasize that this is also about sustainability. Many people try to lose weight by focusing only on diet and exercise while continuing to burn the candle at both ends and live under chronic stress. That approach almost always fails in the long run because it's fighting against powerful biological drives. If your brain is misreading the environment as threatening and energy scarce due to high cortisol and poor sleep, it will push you to eat more and move less, often below the level of conscious awareness. You might find yourself raiding the pantry at night and wonder, why am I doing this? The answer lies in how your brain interprets and responds to chronic stress and sleep debt. So the first practical step for many people isn't necessarily cutting calories or ramping up gym sessions. It's systematically reducing stress where possible through practices like deep breathing, deliberate relaxation, positive social connection, time in nature, even simply slowing down your schedule so you're not constantly in fight or flight. It's also safeguarding sleep with a consistent bedtime, cool, dark bedroom, and avoiding stimulants or screens that disrupt circadian rhythms. By doing this, you're not just helping your mind feel better. You're literally recalibrating the neurochemical systems that control hunger, fullness, reward, and fat storage. You're setting the stage so that when you do make nutrition and exercise changes, they're far more effective and sustainable because you're not working against a stressed, sleep-deprived brain that thinks you're under siege. When people finally experience what it feels like to have lower baseline stress and truly restorative sleep, they often say the same thing. It's so much easier to make healthy choices. I don't feel like I'm constantly fighting myself anymore. That's because they've shifted the internal conditions. The brain is now reading the environment as safe and well-resourced. It turns down the urgent drive to store fat, blunts the cravings for quick energy, and allows higher brain centers to stay in charge. And that's the profound shift. Understanding that managing stress and improving sleep are not just side goals or optional wellness add-ons. They are foundational neurological strategies for guiding your brain out of fat-storing, craving-driven modes and into a state where health becomes the natural outcome of how your biology operates. So now we've talked about how your brain's ancient wiring drives you to overconsume calorie-dense foods and how stress and sleep fundamentally alter your appetite and metabolism. But there's another piece of this puzzle that is equally powerful, arguably even more central to why so many people struggle to maintain a healthy weight. And that's your brain's relationship with dopamine. This is something most people misunderstand. They hear the word dopamine and they think it's all about pleasure. But dopamine isn't really about pleasure. It's about desire, motivation, anticipation. It's the chemical that drives you to pursue things that your brain believes are essential or highly rewarding. In fact, dopamine is less about enjoying something in the moment and more about getting you to take action to go get it. It's the seek more neurotransmitter. Now, evolution designed this beautifully. Dopamine circuits are meant to push you toward things that increase your odds of survival and reproduction. Finding food, securing social bonds, pursuing novelty that might lead to new resources. When you do something your brain perceives as beneficial, dopamine is released. So that dopamine doesn't just give you a tiny buzz. It actually strengthens the neural circuits involved in whatever behavior led to the release, making it more likely you'll repeat it in the future. That's a big reason habits form. So if you think about this from the standpoint of eating, when you take a bite of something sweet, fatty, or salty, your taste receptors send signals to your brain that food is present. The brain, always seeking to ensure survival, responds by releasing dopamine, reinforcing the message, yes, this is good, do this again. But here's where modern life flips this system against us. For most of human history, finding something extremely sweet, like ripe fruit, was relatively rare and seasonal. Finding something intensely fatty, outside of the occasional hunted animal, was uncommon, and salt was often scarce. So these powerful dopamine responses serve to lock in memories about where to find these life-sustaining foods again. Today, however, we're surrounded by hyper-palatable, ultra-processed foods that combine sugar, fat, and salt in concentrations our ancestors could never have imagined. These foods cause massive dopamine surges, far beyond what natural foods produce. Each time you consume them, your brain takes careful note, remembering the cues, the environment, even your emotional state. Your dopamine pathways literally rewire to favor seeking out these foods again. That's why you can suddenly crave a donut just by driving past the bakery where you once stopped months ago, or why seeing a commercial triggers a compulsion so strong it almost feels outside your control. It's not a character flaw. It's your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, strengthening the neural connections that lead you to calorie-dense, highly rewarding experiences. The problem is, those experiences are everywhere now, available at all hours, and designed by food scientists to be irresistible. There's another dimension to dopamine that's incredibly important to understand. Your brain is a prediction machine. It learns to anticipate rewards based on patterns and past experiences. If you always eat ice cream after a stressful day at work, your brain starts firing dopamine not when you take the first bite, but when you simply leave the office. That anticipatory dopamine actually feels like a craving. It's your brain motivating you to follow through on the pattern it's established. So by the time you get home, resisting that tub of ice cream feels nearly impossible. Your brain has already set up the expectation and primed the circuits. This also explains why stress often amplifies cravings. Stress makes your brain look for quick hits of dopamine to counterbalance the discomfort. Highly palatable foods provide that hit instantly. So your brain learns stress equals chocolate or stress equals chips. And every time you repeat that cycle, the connection gets stronger. The more often you satisfy these dopamine-driven urges with food, the more sensitive those pathways become to food cues, and paradoxically, the less sensitive they become to the actual pleasure of eating. That's right, over time, high dopamine spikes from repeated junk food consumption actually downregulate dopamine receptors in your brain. So you end up needing more of the same stimulus to achieve the same level of reward. This is the exact same mechanism at work in substance addictions. The seeking intensifies even as the actual enjoyment fades. That's why you might find yourself standing at the kitchen counter eating handful after handful of chips, not even really tasting them, chasing a satisfaction that never fully arrives. This is incredibly important to realize because it shows us that weight struggles aren't just about physical hunger. They're deeply rooted in how your brain's motivation and reward systems have been sculpted by your environment, habits, and repeated experiences. This is why people say things like, I know what to do, I just can't seem to do it. They're not weak. They're fighting against powerful neurochemical pathways that have been reinforced over years, sometimes decades. And this becomes even more challenging when you consider how modern life has eroded alternative sources of dopamine. Our ancestors got dopamine from a wide range of activities: physical exertion during hunting or gathering, social bonding, storytelling around the fire, novelty from exploring new terrain, solving problems necessary for survival. Today, many of us live relatively sedentary, isolated lives, often stuck in repetitive routines. This creates a sort of dopamine drought, leaving food and screens as the most accessible ways to get those motivational surges. So what's the way out? It's not simply about depriving yourself. In fact, trying to white-knuckle your way through cravings while leaving the rest of your dopamine ecosystem empty almost always fails. Your brain needs rewards. If it doesn't get them from meaningful, healthy sources, it will keep driving you back to quick-fix behaviors like overeating. This means a huge part of changing your relationship with food involves creating new, diverse avenues for dopamine release. When you start consistently rewarding your brain with experiences like physical movement, creative expression, deep social connections, engaging challenges, time in nature, your overall baseline dopamine tone improves. Your brain starts finding satisfaction in a wider array of activities, and the over-reliance on food for pleasure diminishes. And there's an important subtlety here. Many people think the goal is to spike dopamine with these activities in the same way junk food does. But actually, it's healthier when these activities produce more moderate, sustained dopamine. For example, steady-state exercise, like a long walk, a bike ride, or dancing, produces gradual, long-lasting increases in dopamine that leave you feeling balanced rather than depleted. Creative work does something similar. Social bonding releases dopamine along with oxytocin, reinforcing trust and emotional safety. These don't cause the same intense highs as eating an entire box of donuts, but they also don't produce the crashes that follow. By gradually shifting your brain's source of reward away from hyperpalatable foods and toward these more stable, fulfilling activities, you start remodeling those motivation circuits. Your cravings lessen because your brain isn't starved for dopamine anymore. It's getting a steady supply from diverse, enriching experiences. Another powerful approach involves spacing out your indulgences, because dopamine is all about seeking. The more frequently you reward a particular behavior, the less impactful each instance becomes. But when you allow more time between indulgences, your sensitivity resets. This means occasional treats become more satisfying, and you're less driven by compulsive patterns. The brain is remarkably adaptable. With enough repetition of new habits and enough time away from old triggers, the neural pathways that once screamed for junk food begin to fade. Meanwhile, new connections strengthen around healthier pursuits. This is the essence of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to rewire itself in response to repeated experiences. So if you find yourself locked in patterns of eating for pleasure or emotional regulation, the solution isn't to simply clamp down harder with willpower. It's to build a richer life full of alternative rewards, to consciously widen the range of things that bring your brain dopamine. When your days include movement, social laughter, creative challenges, exposure to natural light and fresh air, meaningful small victories, your baseline dopamine levels stabilize. This makes high sugar, high fat foods lose some of their magnetic pull. It's also essential to pay attention to cues, because remember, your brain releases dopamine not just from the reward itself, but from anticipating it. If every time you sit on the couch at night, you pair that with a snack, your brain wires the environment into the craving by changing up the context. Maybe sitting in a different chair, holding a cup of tea instead of a bowl of chips. You start breaking those conditioned links. Over time, this teaches your brain new expectations. It's a gradual process. The circuits that drive compulsive eating didn't form overnight, and they won't unravel overnight, but they will change. With patience, consistency, and a strategic focus on enriching your life with other sources of dopamine, you'll find that those old food cravings become less urgent, less frequent, and far easier to manage. This is how you regain a sense of freedom from the brain's ancient survival wiring. You're not suppressing your drive for reward. You're redirecting it. And in doing so, you transform your relationship with food from something driven by compulsion and emotional regulation into something that's simply about nourishment, enjoyment, and occasional treats that truly feel special. Because at the end of the day, when you learn to guide your brain's powerful dopamine systems instead of letting them be hijacked by modern hyperstimuli, you unlock a path not just to lasting health, but to a life that feels rich, balanced, and deeply rewarding in all the right ways. Now that we've looked closely at how your brain's ancient wiring shapes your cravings, how stress and sleep disrupt your metabolism, and how dopamine drives powerful habits around food, let's bring this all together into something truly hopeful. Because the truth is, your brain is not fixed. It's remarkably plastic. meaning it can change, adapt, and rewire itself based on the signals you give it every single day. And that's really what this all comes down to. Learning how to work with your biology instead of fighting it. Your brain isn't your enemy. It's simply operating on algorithms that were designed to keep you alive in a very different environment. Once you understand those algorithms, you can start to introduce deliberate protocols, specific daily actions that help recalibrate your system so that making healthy choices becomes dramatically easier, more automatic, and frankly, more satisfying. So I want to walk you through some of the most powerful ways you can literally rewire your brain to support leanness, stable energy, and a much healthier relationship with food and stress. These aren't abstract theories. They're practical, evidence-based tools that shift the way your brain regulates everything from hunger to mood to fat storage. One of the simplest yet most profoundly effective of these is getting natural sunlight exposure early in the day. Ideally, within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking, you want to step outside, even if it's cloudy, and let that natural light hit your eyes. This does something incredibly important. It sends a strong signal to a region of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the master clock for your entire circadian system. That morning light acts like a reset button. It aligns your internal clocks with the external day, setting off a cascade of hormonal rhythms that influence everything from when you feel alert and sleepy to when you get hungry to how efficiently your body metabolizes glucose. When you consistently get that early light, your brain strengthens the rhythm of cortisol in a healthy way, peaking it early in the day where it belongs, to promote wakefulness and energy. This means cortisol is lower in the evening, making it easier to unwind and sleep deeply. Better sleep then improves your leptin and ghrelin balance, reduces stress eating, and makes it easier to regulate cravings. It all starts with a simple daily anchor. Just 10 to 15 minutes of morning light can profoundly stabilize your neurochemistry. Another surprisingly powerful protocol involves delaying your caffeine intake by about 90 minutes after waking. Most people roll out of bed and immediately reach for coffee, but this actually collides with your natural morning cortisol surge. By waiting, you allow your brain to fully cycle through its early alertness phase without caffeine artificially overriding it. This keeps your energy levels more stable throughout the day, reducing the late afternoon crashes that often drive people to reach for sugary snacks as a pick-me-up. It's a tiny timing adjustment that pays huge dividends in appetite regulation. Now, let's talk about one of my favorite brain and body tools: deliberate cold exposure. This could be a cold shower, an ice bath, or simply ending your regular shower with 30 to 60 seconds of cold water. When you expose your body to cold, your brain responds by dramatically increasing levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, sometimes by 2 or 3 times baseline. What's fascinating is that these elevated levels don't just spike and crash, they stay elevated for hours, creating a sustained uplift in mood, alertness, and motivation. This means you're less driven to seek out quick dopamine hits from food because your brain is already being generously rewarded by the cold exposure. Over time, this builds a kind of resilience. Your brain learns to associate discomfort with positive outcomes, making it less likely to chase sugary or fatty foods whenever stress hits. Plus, cold exposure slightly boosts metabolism, which is an added bonus. It's a direct, non-food way to feed your brain's need for stimulation and novelty. There's another practice I strongly recommend, especially for people who find their cravings are closely tied to stress: non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR. This might be a guided yoga nidra session, a specific type of body scan, or certain forms of hypnosis like relaxation. The point is to get into a state where your brain waves slow down, almost like in early sleep stages, while you remain aware. Doing this for just 10 to 20 minutes can reduce cortisol, reset dopamine sensitivity, and even improve your ability to focus later. When your brain is less frazzled by stress, it's far easier to resist compulsive eating. So much of overeating isn't about true hunger. It's about trying to medicate an overstimulated, stressed out brain. Practices like NSDR give you another channel to achieve calm and reward without turning to food. Over weeks and months, these practices literally reshape how your brain responds to stress, making it less reactive and more resilient. Another incredibly practical strategy is what I call building a dopamine menu. Think about what typically gives your brain its biggest hits right now. Often processed food, mindless scrolling, maybe alcohol. Then start crafting a diverse list of alternative activities that can also give you healthy dopamine. This could be things like creative projects, learning something new, moderate exercise, meaningful social interactions, time outdoors. The more varied your sources sources of dopamine, the less any one of them, like junk food, dominates your motivational landscape. The goal isn't to deprive yourself of pleasure, it's to create a robust portfolio of rewards so your brain doesn't cling to just one or two maladaptive sources. Over time, as these other activities become more rewarding, your cravings for hyperpalatable foods naturally start to fade. Your brain learns there are many ways to feel good, many ways to be soothed and energized that don't involve spiking your blood sugar and then crashing afterward. There's also a beautiful synergy that happens here. The more you engage in these healthy dopamine practices, the more you improve your baseline mood and motivation. This means you're less vulnerable to emotional eating because you're not constantly chasing relief from low-level dissatisfaction or boredom. Your brain simply doesn't feel as deprived or restless, so you're not driven to fill the gap with food. All of these protocols work together. When you get early sunlight, delay caffeine, practice deliberate cold exposure, engage in NSDR, and build a rich dopamine menu, you're systematically upgrading the internal environment of your brain. You're stabilizing your circadian rhythms, balancing your stress hormones, improving your mood chemistry, and diversifying your rewards. This makes it dramatically easier to eat in a way that supports a healthy body weight without it feeling like a constant battle against cravings. There's something else important to highlight here. Many people try to force themselves into extreme diets or punishing exercise routines in an attempt to override these deeply ingrained brain circuits. But because they haven't addressed the underlying neurobiology, they end up in a willpower tug of war that they almost always lose. Willpower is like a battery. It drains throughout the day, especially under stress. By contrast, when you use these daily protocols to reshape your brain's foundational wiring, healthy choices start to feel almost effortless. You're no longer constantly suppressing cravings. They simply arise less often and with less intensity. Over time, this is how you create what researchers call automaticity. Your healthy behaviors become habits not because you white-knuckled your way there, but because your brain literally rewired through repeated exposure to new patterns. The circuits that once screamed for nightly ice cream get weaker. The circuits that prompt you to go for a walk, pick up a guitar, call a friend, or prep a colorful meal get stronger. This is the essence of neuroplasticity working in your favor. And what's truly remarkable is that this process doesn't just change your relationship to food. It changes your entire sense of well-being. When your brain's reward systems are balanced, when your stress is lower, when your sleep is high quality, you simply feel better. Your days become more energized and purposeful, your nights become more restful, and you discover a kind of internal freedom from compulsions that perhaps you've never experienced before. So often people think the path to health is about tightening the screws, more restriction, more discipline, more guilt. But the real power comes from understanding how your brain works and then gently, consistently guiding it into new patterns. It's about leveraging light, breath, temperature, sleep, novelty, and connection to build a brain that doesn't constantly sabotage your goals. That's not just a strategy for losing weight. That's a strategy for living well. Because at the end of the day, the most profound changes happen not when you try to force your brain into submission, but when you teach it a new, healthier way to feel rewarded, motivated, and deeply alive. So remember this, when you learn to work with your brain instead of fighting against it, shaping your daily environment, your habits, and your internal chemistry in ways that align with how your nervous system actually operates, you don't just change your weight or your cravings, you change the entire trajectory of your health and your life.